right, we can't do a long intro. We can't do a long intro. This is a special show. We had to sit down and pre-record because of Pacific time, Eastern time, Central, all the time zones.
All the time.
We are actually
they all matter equally.
We're going to New York City because we're among the few invited to this private YouTube conference. I'm hoping we get our Illuminati membership cards. So when we do this, we always want to sit down and have a long talk. This is by far our most requested of anyone we've had. This, if you could do a longer chat with, this man has his show, of course, you hear him on Salem Radio every day. You can follow him on Twitter, at Dennis Prager, DennisPrager.com, Prager University, which we post about all the time. What do you
I was going to say, I think it's because he has a voice. He can talk about anything, and you would find it immediately interesting.
Like Sam Elliott.
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly.
Mr. Prager, thank you for being here, sir.
Well, I was thinking of reading the phone book to you and testing that thesis, but they don't make phone books anymore.
Now, did you develop this through years of cigars and bourbon, or did you just come out of the womb talking like this as Mr. Prager?
Well, I have a few answers to that. You'll love this.
Okay.
So I did not speak till I was 3. And my grandfather, may he rest in peace, thought I was retarded. Okay. So, and my line is, so people say, why did you start speaking so late? I said, because I wasn't getting paid.
Yeah, okay.
I couldn't charge. I started speaking when I could charge.
So even little 3-year-old Dennis Prager was like the Joker. If you're good for something, never do it for free.
Capitalist from day one.
Yes.
Oh.
Well, yeah. Now that you mentioned it, I was a capitalist at day one. I used to sell to my classmates stamps.
Really?
Yeah, foreign stamps. I would put them in beautiful glassine envelopes. I would put a little white sticker on it explaining what it was. I loved, it's not, I don't love money as it happens. I'm not money crazed at all.
Right.
But I loved making it. I loved creating something that others wanted.
Sure. You know, it's interesting that you say that stamps. I don't know that was there a big market in your class for stamps?
Yes, you know what? It's very sad to me. You ought to do a show on this.
Okay.
The Death of Hobbies.
Well, there's the new hobby now.
I'm old enough to see that having happened.
Yeah. Well, when I was young, it was Pogs. Jerry remembers Pogs. I don't know if you remember this. Remember the old milk caps they used to have underneath milk, and every now and then they would have pictures. So with my generation, they took that and they turned it into a game where you would stack up the Pogs and you'd hit it with what was called a slammer. It was like plastic sometimes. It was heavier than the Pogs themselves, and as many as you turned over, you would get to keep. And I remember at our Christmas recital as a kid, I went to my friend Johnny Prescott. I forgot to bring my Pogs. I said, listen, give me 5 Pogs and a slammer. You will get half of everything that I procure this evening. I came back with 50 Pogs. I hustled at Pogs in the schoolyard. So then they were banned the next week. So that goes to your point. Any hobby that's fun, the school's banned.
So is that a legit hobby? Or that's fun? But, you know, when I think of hobby, so stamp collecting, coin collecting, for example, that was a collection. That's true. But it's not one you would want to keep, I don't think. Whereas, you know, stamps and coins have a permanent interest.
That's probably true.
I learned an immense amount as a child about the world through stamp collecting. I mean, did you ever hear of Liechtenstein? Unless you collect stamps, nobody ever heard of Liechtenstein.
I'm not going to lie. I haven't.
Exactly. No, that's my whole point. I didn't either. But another one of my hobbies is collecting countries. I've been to 130 countries.
Wow.
That's a lot of travel.
That is.
So I remember when I went to Liechtenstein, holy crow, I know about this place. I have their stamps. Anyway, so I'm just thinking, baseball cards. Did your generation collect any cards?
Well, people did. I wasn't as much into sports.
I did. I collected a lot of baseball cards.
We collected superhero cards and hockey cards in Canada, but it was past the point where they really accrued in value, not like your generation, you know, where some of those are worth a lot.
All right, so you're talking to a fellow hockey fan, even though I'm American.
Really?
Did you know that this was the first Stanley Cup playoff championship? But both coaches were American.
I didn't know that. That is remarkable because, you know, my dad played it.
It is remarkable.
Both American. Gosh, when you look at back when my dad played at U of M, and they basically only drafted Canadian players, and American players kind of had to go through this sort of training camp. It wasn't even considered because all the best players came from Canada. It's changed so much. I mean, you just look at Dallas. Right. Dallas is a hotbed for hockey now. My dad.
Well, look at the biggest hotbed, Nashville.
That's true.
Nashville, Tennessee.
I know. Yeah. I know Nashville, Tennessee of all places. I will say this. It's interesting that you bring that up, and it transitions into what I wanted to talk about with you. Hobbies, I don't know if you would consider not just collecting, but, for example, like martial arts or like jogging, if you consider these hobbies or activities. But there is a big push right now. You see that with the rise of CrossFit and, of course, the rise of injuries. So orthopedics are thrilled. The third place, which we all used to have, right? We talked about that home church. There was the third place, and places in the UK, it's the pub. And that's a big market now that people are trying to fill. I wonder if a big part of that is, like you said, a lack of hobbies, because people tend to congregate around their hobbies and create their own third place. That'd be interesting. I wonder if that would play a role.
I don't know enough about it, but all I could say is I lament the lack of hobbies, because they played such a great role in bringing me joy as a kid. And the beauty was you were self-entertaining.
That's true.
See, a hobby, you can't say, I don't think you could say watching TV. You can't say that's a hobby, because you're doing nothing.
Right.
You have to do something for it to be a hobby.
Well, depends on what people are watching on the internet these days. And that is a destructive hobby, as we would call it, with these young teenagers. Let me ask you this, because you discussed this, and it goes to the wider social issues. So, you've been obviously on AM radio for a long time. And then there have been people who've come and gone, largely been political, who've had sometimes bigger ratings and sometimes less ratings than you. But you've always approached it from more of a cultural point of view. At least that's how I've seen it. And that's kind of the uprising that you're seeing right now online. You're seeing that on YouTube. You're seeing that on social media. If you look at the new conservatives, they're not interested in micro policy, but there is this wave of preserving the idea of westernized culture. And so I say this without a hint of meaning to be insulting at all, but as someone who is older compared to these kids, white guy who they once championed as the enemy of everything, evil, older white guy patriarchy, you've kind of become the cool kid, because now people are wanting to see the world through the lens with which you've always presented it. Have you seen that change in the last 2 years?
Yeah, it's a when you are beating a drum for 40 years,
yes,
and then people say, "Oh, I now hear it."
Right.
What the first thing you do is you thank God that you're still able to beat the drum.
Right.
And that I don't mean physically, that I still have this job and I have such access to people. Yeah. And more than ever, because of Prager University, it's got 400 million views this year. That's a lot of views. Yeah. So, but yes, there is a realization that there's a fundamental problem, and that is an assault on Western civilization. And you're right, I've been talking about that my whole life. When the University of Pennsylvania, Ivy League school, its Department of English took down last year its poster of Shakespeare, because he was a white English male, white European male. Right. You realize it's over, because the whole Western civilization idea is based on what is excellent, not what is your race.
Sure. And we just talked about that yesterday with them demanding in the music festivals. They're demanding less white males. Well, here's the thing. There were periods where that was the case at music festivals, periods like the Joni Mitchells, Stevie Nicks. It just isn't right now. If you look at these big music festivals, they don't really want it. They want to virtue signal and claim they want it. But I do think that you are a particular messenger. Now, I'm not throwing anyone under the bus here, so please, everyone out there, hold your emails. But for example, when I listened to you when I was much younger, you would run opposite the channel. We had two channels, and it was you or Rush is who I had to decide to listen to as a young teenager. Mm-hmm. And brilliant radio host. I'm not taking anything away from him, but as a younger person, it was far more interesting to me to listen to the male-female hour, the happiness hour, discussing culture at large than a senator who, for example, got caught, being bought off with a corrupt bill. That's not the kind of voice that appeals to young people who still believe in the same values that you and I do. Someone like you is able to communicate, and it's just, I don't think you can fake that authenticity. So I wonder now, do you have a bunch of just young whippersnappers coming up and wanting to take pictures? I mean, you're a rock star on YouTube.
I have found a fascinating development, and that is when I talk about non-political subjects, the average age of my caller is in their 20s and 30s. When I talk about politics, it's in the 60s.
Wow. That makes sense. You know what? And we have that almost exact kind of analytical data that we would have. Although when they tie together, for example, we'll be talking about John Oliver as we did in Cole, it's more so taking on a cultural icon and falsehoods. But right away, that's true. And these people, they still want to see westernized society thrive, right? They're still on board that. And I think a lot of conservatives have dismissed them as dumb because they're not involved in their local congressional races. They want to talk about bigger issues, which is almost a return to philosophy.
Right. I actually have more hope for this generation than I did for my own, the baby boomer.
Really? Okay. So
Yes.
I've made that case, but explain it from your point of view.
Oh, very simple. I knew my generation was lost. I will never forget. I give you my word. People who know me long time from radio, I never exaggerate because I really wanted to develop a reputation for credibility. In graduate school, I was at Columbia University in New York. One day, I really remember this vividly. I remember walking around about 116th and Broadway, passing a bar or whatever it was, and thinking, oh my God, I am really alone.
Wow.
I wasn't lonely, but because I had friends, but I was alone in believing in America, that it was an essentially good place, in believing that communism was evil, in believing in the Judeo-Christian value system. At Columbia University, I had one kindred spirit, one. And I saw kids taking over. By the way, this notion, kids taking over the university, leftist kids, this is as old as me, man.
Right.
It was happening in the 70s when I was in graduate school.
Yeah.
There's nothing new.
Well, you know, it's funny. We had someone, I think, when we were in Ireland recently talking with them. They didn't believe me when I said Generation Z is one of the most conservative generations ever. He said, oh, I've seen that they're mostly liberal. I'm saying, no, hold on a second. And I don't have the exact numbers in front of me. But if you take, for example, the baby boomer generation, who've now become one of the more conservative generations, if you were to take them in their late teens or early 20s, and 80% of them were liberal. And now you were to take Generation Z, and only 60% of them would be liberal. It still means that a majority of young people are liberal, but not the overwhelming majority that existed with the baby boom generation. And I try to present it that way, and sometimes you can see the lights go on with people, but I agree with you. And I think the whole doom and gloom which people present on a lot of talk radio is not something you peddle in, and I genuinely believe there's a silver lining with people younger than me, by the way. It's a little younger than me. You know, I'm going to turn 30 relatively soon. I'd say it's probably 22 and younger. They seem to be really, it's that pendulum swinging back against the radicals on campus. And
right, and there is and all of this is news to me because I was pessimistic. I admit it.
Right.
But I'm not nearly as pessimistic now. Partially, frankly, in big part because of Prager University, because I see the numbers, and they're mostly young. And what they're saying is, including high school, is, hey, wait a minute. We're just curious to hear another side. Mm-hmm. And then they hear it. Just take an example, any example. But the number of people, and this is a political economic thing, which you would think they're not interested in.
Right.
But when they, everyone says minimum wage, minimum wage, minimum wage. Well, it turns out that vast numbers of people get fired from their jobs, and great numbers of restaurants close up. They're no longer in business because of the compassionate minimum wage. Maybe it's not so compassionate.
Right.
And a kid is prepared to say, that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's right. And it's also why it bothers me when people say compassionate conservatism. This is a term that was coined because when conservatism is already compassionate. Compassion doesn't mean giving someone what they want when they want it. No. It means truth. And that always, it's conceding too much territory. Oh, no, I'm a conservative, but I'm a compassionate conservative.
right. Yeah. That's right.
Well, speaking of which, so you are doing, you're working on a film with Adam Carolla. I want to make sure I get the title. Do you have a title? I know it's about safe spaces.
No safe spaces. And people should go to the website and see the trailer. And if they're so inclined, help us make it with a donation, because it's publicly funded, and Hollywood isn't going to make it. But Adam and I are going to go, and we're going to, with humor and with seriousness, expose what's happening on our college campuses in a way that will really awaken vast numbers of Americans, including young people. And by the way, and I'm not doing this to patronize you, the same exact issue was in Canada.
Sure.
I mean, there's no difference.
Oh, no. It's far worse in Canada than in the States.
It's right. That's right.
Yeah, because there is no constitutional right to freedom of speech, which was just reaffirmed yesterday, which I'm happy about. You know, it's funny that you mentioned this. I was working behind the scenes, had already sold the script, the idea on a film very similar to this. It was partially scripted, partially documentary, and we shot some test footage at a couple universities, and one was University of Michigan. This is not a joke. We sat down there with the head of Afrocentric lesbian studies, and we sat down with an animal telepathist who was teaching students. So we shot this scene where this woman claimed that she was communicating with a dead dog that we made up. And everyone had to treat this as though it was a legitimate worldview because she believed in this idea of reincarnation. And when we looked through the test footage, this was years ago, they said, no one's going to believe this. This is too far. No one's going to, this is too absurd to be in the realm of reality. And it's why it never got off the ground. But I think now everyone knows this is mainstream on campus.
That reminds me of one of Woody Allen's great lines in one of his movies, that he was majoring in plant psychology.
Was this? I'm trying to think of which one was it. It wasn't Annie Hall. Was it Manhattan?
It was probably Manhattan. If it wasn't Annie Hall, it was probably Manhattan.
Yeah.
But it wasn't Sleeper. Those are the three. I know all his films, but those are the three I know best.
Sleeper is one of my favorite films ever. It was the first.
How could it not be? Don't start me. Exactly.
It's one of my favorite films because it was the first Woody Allen film I was allowed to watch when I was young, and my father was like, "Okay, you can watch this maybe around 11 years old," and I just thought it was funny. When I went back and watched it when I was older, it's fantastic. And Woody Allen would probably hate the actual commentary that it is on society today because it would vindicate a much more conservative point of view. He probably wouldn't like that, but it truly does.
Okay. Well, now you really started me on a very interesting thing.
Okay, go ahead.
I believe the most powerful film ever made on behalf of God-based ethics is Woody Allen's film Crimes and Misdemeanors. If I told people this was made by evangelical Christians, they would have said, yeah, that makes sense. Woody Allen wrote it, who was an atheist.
Right.
But he made the case in it for if there's no God, nothing's wrong.
Right.
So powerfully, no other film has ever approached it. I consider it one of the 10 most important films ever made, Crimes and Misdemeanors. I wrote this. Woody Allen wrote me a letter. This is like 30 years ago. And he said, well, I guess that's one way of looking at it, but I don't really think that's what I had in mind. But no. Often, artists' art is greater than the artist.
Yeah, that is absolutely true. And you do have to be able to separate sometimes the art from the artist. Otherwise, you'd never see a Sean Penn film again.
Right, exactly. That's exactly right.
Speaking of which, since we're talking about culture, what happened to him? I remember the Sean Penn growing up who I said, that man deserves the award for I Am Sam, but this was at the stage in his career where he said award ceremonies were rigged, they were fake, they were it was basically masturbatorial congratulatory sessions, and he never showed up. Remember that for years, Sean Penn would never show up to an award ceremony. That's why he lost for I Am Sam. And now he is Mr. Award Ceremony. Has anyone else seen that?
Well, give credit to Woody Allen. He doesn't go.
That's true. That's true.
That's Woody Allen's view of the ceremonies.
Yeah. Also, probably because he's wanted for crimes against humanity. It's so unfortunate.
He knows he's bumping into people.
Yeah, I know.
Not worth it.
Okay, so speaking of which, another point that you make while we're talking about society, and a lot of young people are making this now. They're falling into this idea that, okay, they're understanding feminism for the fraud that it is. You've made the point that feminism, ironically, isn't feminine whatsoever, that it's actually anti-feminine. And I always thought that was interesting. So I want you, the master, to explain it to people watching.
Well, from the beginning, I said feminism is a misnomer. It doesn't celebrate the feminine. It celebrates the masculine.
It's true.
Men have sex with no emotion and can go from body to body and have a great time. Well, so can we women, which was just a prescription for depression in a lot of young women. That's why so many more are depressed in the college era or at the college age. They have bought this nonsense. Your sexuality is just like male sexuality. They've acted on it, but it turns out their sexuality is not like male sexuality. It's not better, not worse, it's just different. So that was a clear prescription of let's be like men. Another one, men define themselves by their work. We women will define ourselves by our work. So you're crazy if you think the most important thing you could do is be a mother and wife and make a home. You're crazy. You will get your joy from sales. That's where that's where your meaning in life will come from. By the way, for a male in sales, it is perfectly true. Much of we men, we are what we do. Whether we like it or not, that is the way we think.
Sure.
Because I think male and female is different but complementary.
Yes. Well, that's what, the biblical worldview, we've often referred to it in the church as complementarianism. Let me ask you this. I view it that way. Like you said, men will take pride in sales, or, for example, a big part of what defines me outside of, obviously, my faith and my relationships is my work. A big component to that is because work is how you provide for your woman, for your family, which is central to masculinity. And that's a big part of our identity.
Yes.
And it's not for a woman. Do you think that plays a big role?
Yes, that's exactly right. And then, look, how do I know? I know this because I, like you, had a wise understanding, not from me, from something wise called the Bible. Right. I know it's mocked today because everything it stands for, the left doesn't stand for. So there's a real conflict in civilization. Okay, fine. But I knew it later from calls from women onto my radio show. And I would say, so let me ask you, now that you are 40 years old, 50 years old, if you bought feminism in college, are you happy you did? And caller after caller said, I was sold a bill of goods. I now am a very high CEO, but you know what? It pales in comparison to coming home to a husband and children. Yeah. And I made a big mistake.
Well, that is something. And I was actually, what were you going to say, Jerry?
Oh, go ahead with your point first.
No, go ahead.
My thing was, it's funny how I was talking about this morning. Feminism is a celebration really of masculinity, but somehow they figure it out to vilify. The premise of men is immediately vilified. For instance, this weekend over Father's Day, University of Michigan came out with a study saying low testosterone may actually make you a better father. And it just comes at this. The premise is masculinity.
Let's remove what makes you male.
You're male. That's automatically
and apply
bad.
it to women.
Yeah. So it's just like the mental gymnastics.
Well, the point here is their real agenda is to feminize men and masculinize women.
Yeah.
That's their real agenda. They don't want differences.
Right.
It bothers them because this took me decades to figure out. Leftism is at war with reality.
Yeah.
Life is too messy. Mm-hmm. Let's undo it.
And isn't that ironic because they always like to claim the territory of nuance, right? You right-wingers see it as black and white. We see the nuance, but they are reality just at some point has hit them in the face.
Or how about this? We're anti-science if we merely say, yes, the world is getting warmer, but we don't know fully why, and we don't necessarily think we'll become extinct in 25 or 30 years.
Right.
We're anti-science. But if you say a person who has a vagina, a uterus, ovaries, eggs, two X chromosomes, and breasts, and produces milk, is not a woman, that's not anti-science.
No, I know. We've made that point on this show so many, and I'm sure in large part to being influenced by you. You know what? It's funny that you bring that up. I will say this, as far as giving you more hope, we see a lot of young people who are atheists who watch our show. For example, we have Convert Crowder Week. Sorry, my dog It has to go out to the bathroom. This is the wonder of new media. He's in here in the studio. We have Convert Crowder Week because I said I was at an Irish Catholic wedding and people were trying to convert me to Catholicism. And I said, if people want to present the case as to why it's the one true church, I will welcome it and we can have this discussion. People most excited about it are atheists. Unlike new atheism in the era sort of Dawkins, less so Hitchens, and then Sam Harris, a lot of them have turned on it and said, well, you know what? I don't necessarily believe in God, but they call themselves Christian sympathetic because they do see Judeo-Christian values as the fulcrum of Western society. So I will say that is changing at a very rapid rate just in the last year and a half for people who aren't even believers.
Wow, that's great to hear. I hope they'll see our videos. For example, my videos on the 10 Commandments, because even if you're an atheist, at least see why that's the central moral document of humanity.
Yeah, I agree with you. And let me ask you this. So, okay, there's no other way to approach it. Did you read about... I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be crass here. BuzzFeed, speaking of women, feminism, the women who painted with their menstruation blood. Have you seen this?
Oh, this is another gift of the left, scatological art.
Okay, good.
Urine, fecal matter, menstrual blood, and I'm not putting menstrual blood with those other two things,
right.
But if the body excretes it, they make art out of it. This is what the talent-free do.
At some point, you start find yourself just begging for more Jackson Pollock paintings because this has got so bad.
That's right. At least it's
bleeding.
Yes, it's kind of like with music now with this alternative rock. I'm going, God, just bring me back Pink Floyd's 40 minutes of and animal sounds. I'll take it.
Oh, you will love this. Today on my show, I played a few minutes of a new piece of music, classical music, because that's what I'm in. I conduct orchestras periodically.
Sure.
So I follow this stuff. What the left has done to art is like what they've done to music is what they've done to art. Mm-hmm. It's become nonsense.
Yeah.
A guy wrote a 3.5-hour piece just using one note, a D.
Really?
People, yes. And how do I know? It was seriously reviewed in the New York Times.
Wow. Wow, that is how, if you can, when we get off air, have one of your people send that over if you can. I would love to see. We'll probably love to talk about it on the show. Please.
You know, no. All right, you send me an email, and I will email back to you the article.
That sounds fantastic.
And it's got a sound sample with it, so you could play it for your listeners.
What really bothers me about that, and then I want to get back to the masculinity thing, because I do have an important point I want to ask you about. But what really bothers me about that is the same thing that bothers me about sports. For example, Gerald Morgan, who's often on the show, in that chair, he went to Notre Dame. He was the first pick to go to Notre Dame, blew his knee out, never got to play football. We probably don't know who the best athletes were of all time because they didn't make it through the ringer. There are probably some unbelievable athletes who just blew a knee out, blew an ankle out. I knew a guy, to compare it to art, there was a guy in the Montreal subway system. This is true, just like you. I'm not exaggerating. You've heard me talk about this on the show several times. 3 flutes, one in each nostril, one in his mouth, and he played the entire Star Wars theme song.
All right, well, that is great.
But you'll never know about him.
Right.
Because someone drew with their period blood. What bothers me is that they bumped the spot for the guy in the subway.
I do want to know. I wish you had a picture, though. How do you get a flute up your nose?
Oh, maybe it was a side. Maybe these were piccolos.
Oh, piccolo is possible.
Maybe they were piccolos.
A piccolo is possible.
Piccolos and a flute.
And by the way, that same guy then put 2 sticks here and did the timpani.
Yes. He probably could. I wouldn't put it past him. We had a guy who played the spoons outside of Ogilvy's. That was our Macy's. You'd sit there and go, this guy has a gift, and no one will ever know. All right, anyway, going back to the feminism issue, here's one thing you've talked about a lot, and I think is important for people to know. At the same time as we're talking about imbuing women with these fundamental human rights like abortion and free birth control now, right? All of these are women's rights. There definitely is a movement to simply strip men of basic biological functions which have served as rights. For example, manspreading. We have a big video coming out on that tomorrow. That's been banned in Madrid. It's where men sit slightly wider. Yes.
It's been banned in Madrid?
In Madrid, and there's a push to ban it elsewhere. We actually went on it. People will see this tomorrow.
Specifically on public transit,
Specifically on public transportation. We asked women, we offered them a $20 gift card to take part in the experiment. we said, okay, look how you're sitting. Now we want you to put on this apparatus. And all it was a jock strap, which they put on outside of their pants. So it would be nowhere near as uncomfortable as having a sexual organ between your legs. They sat down and every single one of them manspread and said, I get it now. This really wouldn't be comfortable to close my legs. And it's a law in a place like Madrid. And then you have the cultural ramifications of practices, you've talked about this, like smoking, cigars, pipes, the things that men have naturally enjoyed for a long time. These are being stripped away, eliminated as, like you said, even hobbies, let alone rights, while we're adding new non-existent rights to the feminine. That seems to be something that has really turned off a lot of young males, including even some young formerly feminists.
Well, it's good to hear, because I have said often, I feel sympathy for this generation. They are the object of an experiment.
Yeah.
For example, the number of teachers who will no longer call, in elementary school, will no longer call their students boys and girls. They're told to. In Charlotte, North Carolina, they were given an order. Do not refer to your students as boys and girls, just as students, because they don't want to impose a gender identity on a 10-year-old.
Yeah, I actually would take the other view, where if you allow your 10-year-old to go through a sex change operation or any kind of hormone replacement therapy, you should be locked away for child abuse.
That's right. That's correct. We are really in sync. That's exactly right.
Well, speaking of that, I don't know if you've talked about this on your show, but just as far as science, you know the whole organic food trend. I'm sure obviously you're in California, and I'm sure you're aware of, BPA free. You see that term everywhere, right? It means this is safe plastic. Don't put this in the microwave. Well, a big reason for that is because these chemicals act as what they call xenoestrogens in the body. In other words, they can raise estrogen to a level that can actually, in a male specifically, be toxic. So we use organic food to avoid the pesticides, which
same
could
reason
alter
stay away from soy and those
the
kind of
same
things.
thing, you'd stay away from soy. Don't put lavender on your nipples. These are rules that you live by. But then, when injected directly into your ass, however, we're supposed to believe that estrogen replacement therapy in the male anatomy is consequence-free. It's something I've never had explained to me other than I'm a hate speaker.
Well, other than those who feel that they're women, who would get that?
No, well, no one. Yeah, no male would.
Oh, I see. You're saying that even those, there would be some health consequence.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, a big part of the fitness industry and the organic food is to avoid, basically estrogen mimickers. That's what they are in the body, specifically males. They talk about this, GMOs. Yeah. It specifically goes back time and time again to, men have higher estrogen levels, and this increases cancer. Listen.
Yeah. Far beyond even just sterilization at that point.
Yes, exactly. But then they abandon this ship when it comes to men saying they want to be a woman and they want to inject estrogen. They say, well, you know what, the science isn't in yet. We don't know if it's bad for them.
Well, the whole thing is anti-science, and as I said earlier, you have every single physical characteristic of a female, but if you say you're a male, you're a male. Now, if you say to me, look, I am physiologically a female, I really have what we call gender dysphoria. I identify as a man. I will dress as a man. I will do whatever I can to look like a man. Please call me Bill. Okay. I'll call. No, I'm not joking at all. I will call you Bill.
Sure.
I will honor it. The issue to me is not compassion for the individual. It's the war on the belief that there is male and female. That's what is so dangerous. And by the way, I'll tell you where it began. It began with same-sex marriage.
Yes.
Same-sex marriage, the argument was two arguments. One, the gender of your spouse is irrelevant. Marriage is marriage. Gender is irrelevant. Two, it doesn't matter if a child has a mother and father. Two fathers, two mothers is just as good because there's no difference between the sexes. Once those were accepted as arguments, this is inevitable. If there's no difference, then you are what you want to be.
Yeah. And you know what? I will say this. You probably don't. You had a caller on your show. And I thought that this central premise that you're discussing right now is the single easiest refutation of comparing integrated marriage, racially mixed marriage versus same-sex marriage. And I don't know if you remember this, but a caller said, well, what's the difference then if you're saying, would you have had a problem with black and white women getting married, black men and white women? And I don't know, I don't want to put you on the spot. Do you remember how you answered that?
Yes. Yes, I said there is no difference between a black and a white, but there are great differences between a man and a woman.
Yes, it's quite simple.
It is. It's quite simple.
You worded it in a way that stuck with me. I hate to, not to say that it's not as good now, but I remember you worded it. You said, I don't believe that there's anything a white mother can provide for a child that a black mother can't. But I certainly believe that there's something a mother can provide.
That is a better answer.
Well, I remember,
much better.
Well, it stuck with me because I remember providing that answer to teachers in college, and they just said, "You're getting an F, so just stop speaking."
By the way, I'm just curious. Where do you hear my show?
Well, now I would just hear it online. I haven't listened to radio in a long time.
Oh, you hear it online?
Yeah.
Okay, fine.
Back then, this is when my family lived in Dallas, and I think you were a Case guy and followed by Michael Medved.
Right. That's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. No. Actually, we visited Dallas, and then I was in Montreal, and I would listen to Case Guy online, because that was the only station I knew. We didn't get conservative radio in Montreal.
Right. You can get my show. I have a lot of Canadian listeners, but they're like this underground movement.
Yes.
In Canada, I was stunned when you had a conservative prime minister. I was stunned. I know Canada pretty well.
Right.
It was an aberration.
Yes, and he was fantastic, by the way. One of the most consistent prime ministers we've had.
Harper was your Reagan. I said that all the time.
Yeah, he really was. He really was. And we knew people who would go just to the movie theater, and they'd run into him all the time. Just the nicest guy. Okay, Mr. Prager, you've given us enough of your time. Let me ask you this final closing thought. If you are to pass the torch, because now you have this massive audience, and you do have the ear of a lot of young people. We've talked about masculine and feminine and kind of culture, Western civilization. If there's one takeaway that you want younger people listening to this show, to take away as far as what is most important for them to learn and understand, to take that torch from your generation and make sure that it's not lost as they pass it on.
I have in my mind, I'm racing through what idea would I like to leave most. I think in the final analysis, if this may not be the most important, but there is none that is more important.
Okay.
People are not basically good, and the most important task of a society is to figure out how to make people good. The left believes people are good. They inherited the French Revolution. I inherited the Bible and the American Revolution, which was based on the Bible. Mm-hmm. They know we're not basically good. I'm not saying we're basically evil, but we're not basically good. And therefore, unlike the left, I don't blame rape and murder on poverty or racism. I blame it on the murderer or the rapist. And how do you make good people should preoccupy us.
I think that's a good one to pick, even if, as you said, you're not sure if it's the most important idea, but none are more important.
It's tied.
Yes, it's tied up there with collecting baseball cards. But I will say that you talked about that last time, and that is what stuck with a lot of people. So I'm glad to hear you reiterate it. At Dennis Prager on Twitter, DennisPrager.com, Prager University. Please go support, if you want to, his film with Adam Carolla. It's being crowdfunded. No Safe Spaces. Mr. Prager, thank you so much for taking the time. We hope to have you back again and again as long as you're able to.
I want to come back again and again. You're a delight.
Oh, stop it. You're going to make me blush. We'll see you all tomorrow with the man-spreading video. And as soon as we shut this off, I need Mr. Prager to send me that D.